Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We're going to be talking about the board's role in acquisitions, both before, during, and after the deal. And joining me should be a familiar face. Let's welcome back Paula Loop, who's the leader of PwC's Governance Insight Center. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So you guys have been doing a lot of work on series, risks, some other topics, all that are critical topics, but this one certainly gets a lot of attention, and that's your M&A series.
Yes.
Okay? And you have a publication out appropriately titled, Considering an Acquisition, What Boards Need to Know Before, During, and After the Deal. Tell us a little bit about the series.
Sure, and actually we have a publication that went out already on IPOs, so that one's out there. Acquisitions is the second one, so we'll talk more about that one today.
Okay.
And then we also have one coming on divestitures. We're going to do one on just deal strategy in general. And then I think a really interesting one will be on joint ventures and partnerships, alliances sort of thing. I think we're seeing more and more companies doing that these days, so that'll get a little bit of attention. You know, when I think about a director's role in acquisitions, there's companies out there that are serial deal doers, right? So they're constantly doing acquisitions. They bring in companies, they carve out pieces and sell them off. And I think directors that work with those companies probably have a lot of opportunity to see different areas of deal activity. But then there's companies that don't do a lot of deal activity, right? And for those directors, hopefully these papers will be really handy for them to just pull up when there's something of interest. They want to do a deep dive on, say, a divestiture that's coming or an acquisition that they're thinking. Just a good refresher reminder of things to pay attention to.
Well, we know it's an important topic because more companies get sued over M&A deals than they do anything else. And here's something else that's interesting. There is pretty much a consensus out there that most M&A deals aren't successful.
Yep.
So that's an issue. So explain sort of why it ends up that way.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, acquisitions are so complicated. There's so many different areas to make sure that you get right to say that you've really delivered shareholder value or the synergies that you are looking for. So there's the components of the actual deal itself, but then there's the integration that follows on to the deal. So there's a lot of ways where this can go a little sideways, and you may not actually get, you know, your real return on investment out of it. It takes a ton of time for management. Executives really will spend more time, an inordinate amount of time, on an acquisition or a deal. So there's a lot of possibilities for things to go wrong.
Well, everybody takes a big sigh when the deal closes. Actually, most of the
That's
failure.
when the work starts.
Yeah,
right.
Most of the failure comes really in the integration part, marrying those cultures together, doing all that. So,
exactly.
So, what would you say then? This, I'm sure, is the crux of your publication. But what are the critical areas that boards should consider when the company is contemplating an acquisition? So.
Yeah, I think the board's role in the acquisition itself, so those critical time when you're really, you know, you're working on it, is first of all, what is the company really trying to get out of this deal, and how can they tell that story? So making sure that everybody's really clear as to what you're trying to achieve here. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty, I think pricing can be an area where the board should play a significant role. We frequently see what we call deal fever, so where management gets so involved and excited about the transaction that they get to a point where they just want to make it happen no matter what. So we see some best practices where boards sort of put a framework around it and say, you know, here's a price range that you can play with. If you need to go beyond that, we'd like you to come back to the board, and then we can help do sort of a sanity check on where you're going. So pricing is critical. I think the other really important area is assumptions. So when you're starting to do the modeling about why this is a good idea, why there's going to be a real return on investment here, Modeling is really critical, and it's all based on the assumptions. So you can basically make numbers do whatever you want them to do if you've got those correct assumptions in there. So directors should spend a fair amount of time poking and prodding at those assumptions, really understanding what's underneath them, and then also thinking about, how successful has management been in the past at their projections. Like if you do a post-mortem on some of these other ones, are they good projectors? Are they more conservative? Are they more aggressive? How does that kind of play out so you have an idea of what to expect on how this is going to end up?
Yeah.
So I think those are probably the biggest areas. And then the last one I would mention is just around integration. That in itself, you need to understand management's plan for integration, who's going to lead it, what they're focused on, some milestones related to that. And that's really a big place the board can play as well.
Yeah, I'll add one thing, particularly to those companies that you referenced that maybe don't do this all the time. When you're going into the transaction, sometimes you don't have a deep bench, meaning you got to keep your regular business going
Absolutely.
while you're doing all this board stuff.
And it's a big distraction. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And if you haven't thought that through, and the same people are trying to do both, something typically can suffer in the process. So,
yes. No, you're absolutely right.
So culture is always a big thing. That's something I would think that a board member on the front end has to think about that, on how easy it's going to be to integrate what we want to do.
Yeah.
Tell us how you've addressed that in the publication as well.
Yeah, no, I think culture and talent probably go hand in hand. You mentioned talent earlier on who's going to focus on this, but also in an acquisition, there's hopefully elements of talent you want to bring in. So there's some really top people that you think are critical to making this work, and probably critical to keeping that culture in the right place or helping them adapt to a new culture. So I think you do want to focus on talent. The areas of culture are really interesting. There is a term called a culture audit that sometimes boards will talk about or companies will talk about, which is really a deep dive to understand how does this company, the acquiring company, or the acquiree company, how does it work? How does it function? What are the elements that really make that culture tick and have made them successful in the past? And hopefully that works and connects with your culture and where you're trying to bring them together. And your point is, if it's a big gap, it's going to be hard to integrate those two entities.
Yeah, that's a part, I think, that's one of the key questions boards have to ask, because if pay structures are different, if philosophy on everything from how they turnover, inventory. There's just a ton of things that you have to say, is this going to be a transition that we can pull off?
Yeah,
so
yeah. That'll really deliver that value we were looking for.
Right.
And make it a successful, versus an unsuccessful acquisition.
Well, you guys do a great job with this series because you always list the facts, and as a board member, you can go down pretty quickly. So where can people get a copy of this latest publication in the series, or any of the series that you do?
Yeah, they can go to PwC Governance Insight Center website, and on that you'll find the IPO paper that's already out. You'll find acquisitions, and if you keep looking there over the next year, you'll see the other 3 that are on their way.
And if you send us the links, we'll be glad to put them on Boardroom Resources as well.
We appreciate that.
Paula, it's always a pleasure. We thank you for coming in and sharing, again, the latest in the M&A series. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
That will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week, where we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.